You have reached the deepest depths of the internet. If it is greatness you seek, you've come to the wrong show. If it's about not wasting time, don't worry, you're never going to get your time back. If it's knowledge you seek, just be aware, any knowledge gained here is going to be minuscule. So now it's time for Accost with Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Accost I am Tony Gerdeman here with Tom Orr. Shannon Summers is on assignment. Tom, where is that assignment?
Shannon is out trying to get us a bunch of 5-star reviews, and we figured the best way for him to do that was to not be on the show.
Wow. I would not be surprised if he edits that part out.
I'm just telling you what you said earlier. I mean, you were there, so obviously you know that. We miss you, Shannon. We love you, Shannon.
So the news this past week, and Tom, maybe the Joe Burrow ordeal is over for the summer, at least now that he's decided to go to LSU. And we can, that speculation ends. Where will he go? The speculation that will happen this season then, and I was talking on the radio this morning about how Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins are going to be linked together forever, at least in college, because Buckeye fans are going to compare them both, and who did what, who got better, and did the coaches screw up? But I was wondering, when we're talking about his two choices of LSU and Cincinnati, we had talked in the past about would he go to Cincinnati or even Ohio and give up his shot for a national title, because he's a guy who's competed for national titles at Ohio State, and could he just give that up and give that drive up and give that goal and that quest up? And clearly he couldn't. I think that's part of the reason he went to LSU, because it is a status program, even though they haven't shown it. I looked it up today. They're 1-8 in their last 9 games against ranked opponents. So they really haven't been living up to their billing, but they also have had pretty terrible quarterbacks of late. And even when they've had decent quarterbacks, maybe the coaching hasn't been all that great. But do you think there's any, Ohio State and Cincinnati play next year? I was wondering if this was a situation where Urban is sort of steering Joe Burrow, saying, "Hey, LSU, that's a pretty good gig if you're looking. I mean, if you want my input, I think LSU, thinking that LSU has talent, what they need is a quarterback to maybe keep Alabama out of the playoffs, possibly. Do you think this is a Woody Hayes situation of when if it's between Michigan and Notre Dame back in the day, he's telling kids to go to Notre Dame?"
It's funny because I'm sure that's where Urban would have wanted him to go. I'm sure Urban is very glad that does not have Joe Burrow on the schedule next year, just because that would be a huge distraction. If he'd gone to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati comes to Ohio State next year, then that becomes the Joe Burrow Bowl, and that's all anyone's talking about, and it becomes a distraction for the team. And I'm sure Urban would prefer to not have it that way. So, having him at LSU makes Nick Saban's job, 2% harder this year, because LSU is one of those teams that has a very talented roster, but they've been missing a quarterback for years, and no one on the team this year looked particularly promising. They've got maybe a freshman was going to be starting this year, and now just having a veteran presence there is going to be an upgrade. So, I think if Urban Meyer had really could have guided where Joe Burrow played his football this fall, he would have guided Joe Burrow to stay at Ohio State. So I'm not sure how much impact Urban Meyer really had on it, but I would guess Urban Meyer's pretty happy with the choice.
Yeah, looking at what LSU has at quarterback, it's not good. They redshirted freshman Lowell Narcisse last year, who was a freshman who was a recruit with good offers, really good offers. I think Alabama was even in there, but so he didn't play last year. He redshirted. Miles Brennan was a true freshman last year and won the backup job. He was 14 of 24 last year. And then, but the guy who emerged this spring as possibly the number one guy was Justin McMillan, who didn't play last year, even though I don't believe he was injured. But he played the year before as a true freshman, didn't play last year as a redshirt freshman. Now he emerges this spring as the redshirt sophomore, as possibly the guy, but he's got all of one career pass attempts in it, to his name. Albeit it was a completion, Tom, so the guy is perfect in his career.
I mean, if you've got a quarterback who can complete more than 100% of his passes, I'd like to see him.
Right, and Joe Burrow is good. I don't know if he's Tate Martell good, though.
Well, that's not really a fair standard to hold people to.
Miles Brennan's dad came out, I think, today and said, all Joe Burrow has on my kid is 3 years and 15 pounds. And I'm thinking, that's quite a lot, though. 3 years of experience. He's got the size that you need your quarterback to be. That's a pretty significant advantage, Tom.
Yeah, all he has is experience, probably strength. He might be a little faster. He might be a little bit of a better thrower. But I mean, how many of those are you really going to use to decide who you want to be your starting quarterback? I mean, come on.
It's all overrated bullcrap.
Well, and you know what? He doesn't come first alphabetically from Brennan and Burrow. So I would like to think that Ed Orgeron would take the important issues like that into consideration while he's making the decision.
Well, and then Joe Burrow's dad came out today and said all Miles Brennan has on Joe is like 4 letters in the alphabet.
It's not the length of your last name. It's how you. I'm not gonna finish that. There we go. I will just tell you what it isn't. That's all I'm gonna say.
Speaking of not finishing, do you think? I'll let you know how I feel about Ed Orgeron. I don't think he's the guy at LSU. I mean, he's the guy right now. I don't think he is what is going to make LSU a contender in the SEC West when you're combating Nick Saban, and they've added Jimbo Fisher, they've added Chad Morris at Arkansas. You still have Auburn. I don't see Ed Orgeron doing anything of note at LSU. And you look at the 2018 class, the top 40 kids, according to the 24/7 composite, LSU signed 3 of them last year. And they lost a dual threat from LSU, like the number 3 or number 4 dual threat quarterback in the nation. He went to TCU from Louisiana. And when you're losing recruits that you need to TCU and you're LSU, that shouldn't be happening. And this isn't as bad as Charlie Weiss to Kansas. Nothing was ever that bad. That's the basement of all hires ever. But this one, it may be split level and not on the first floor.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like he's going to be the guy who wins them another national championship. They're okay. They're fine. But, I mean, you named all those coaches, and, Chad Morris is probably a year or 2 away from really being a threat. But, Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State could be that's a pretty intriguing hire, pretty good hire. So Orgeron has the advantage of a better in-state talent base than a lot of those other schools. I mean, if you just had to recruit from within your state borders, you'd much rather be recruiting in Louisiana than Arkansas or Tennessee or Mississippi or Kentucky or Missouri or, most of the other spots in the SEC. But I don't know that we've seen anything that indicates he's going to be able to get them over the hump. I mean, I went through their schedule. I looked at their over-under before Joe Burrow announced he was going there and after. The number hasn't really changed. It's still 7.5. How much you have to pay to win $100 has changed a little bit. It's shifted. The line has shifted slightly up, but it's gone from -110 to -120 on the over. So yes, that's a change, but it's not. It didn't jump a win and a half when Joe Burrow showed up there. So that tells you 7.5 is not a huge number. That's if they go 8-4, that's probably a disappointing season, and they're already hitting the over there. So I think that tells you that there's some kind of a consensus out there that there are definitely some pieces missing at LSU, and top line head coach is probably one of them. It was a great story. That was his lifelong dream. He probably should have gotten the USC job when they hired Steve Sarkisian. He did a great job as an interim there. And, and he didn't get the job there. So, and it was a cool story when he got the job at LSU, but I don't know if it's going to work out.
I called him the Cajun Brady Hoke once, and I thought, oh, that's pretty clever. And I checked on Twitter, and I was far from the first person to ever call him that. And that's what I see him as, just a guy who is better as an assistant. And you mentioned, I mean, he's a guy who, this is his dream job. He's from Louisiana. You would think these factors would come into play with the in-state recruiting, but you look at, I don't know what he's doing right now, but it didn't pay off last year. Although perhaps it's probably too early for that. But when the over/under is 7.5, that's not just talent. That's also the assumption that you're going to lose a game or two that maybe you shouldn't, because that's what coaches like Ed Orgeron do. That's what coaches like Brady Hoke do. They might have the talent for 9 or 10 wins, but they're going to screw up 1 or 2 along the way. And can that talent overcome the coaching mistakes? You will see. Having a guy like Joe Burrow is going to help for sure, in my opinion. But they lose Darius Geis, that running back, DJ Chark at receiver, and plus you've got these receivers at LSU who seem to do better in the NFL than they do at LSU, and that comes down to coaching, in my opinion. And you look at the guy that is coaching Joe Burrow now, the quarterback's coach at LSU is Steve Ensminger, who the last time he was a quarterback coach was 2003 against Auburn. Now, he did step in when Les Miles was fired. They moved him from tight ends coach to quarterbacks coach for most of the season in, 2016. And then he went back to tight ends coach, and now he's back to QB coach because for some reason Ed Orgeron didn't like Matt Canada, who everybody in college football loved except for Orgeron, but he's the head coach, so we'll see what happens there. But I don't know how much talent is around him, and Tom, I'm not that enthralled with the quarterback coach that he has at LSU, sort of like wasn't in 2015 and 2016 with Tim Beck.
Right. There's not a track record there of developing tremendous quarterbacks. I mean, the last quarterback from there there was a graphic that they put out recently that they had seven quarterbacks drafted since 2008 or something like that. And yup. And then you go down the list and it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. Oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. It was like a whole string of 6th and 7th round picks and guys who had not had great college careers either. It wasn't, like a JT Barrett where it's like, well, he didn't get picked, but he had a great college career. It was a bunch of guys who you kind of went, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He wasn't very good in college. And it's been a solid decade of that. So, I don't know how much faith I have in their coaching staff, both in terms of player development and play calling. I don't have a ton of faith there. That is a program that has, I think, gotten by on in-state talent, tremendous talent in the trenches for quite a while now. And they're talented enough that they don't go 3-9, but the coaching probably holds them back from at least a win or two, like you said. I mean, I don't know. What's your expectation for Burrow this year? If you go through the grad transfer quarterbacks, there's not a huge list of tremendous successes. I say that, and now everyone at home is yelling at their car radio, well, what about Russell Wilson? And I can tell you that you're yelling that because he's the one glaring example of someone that was a big success. But that's not – you're coming in the summer – You're not coming in. You weren't there for spring ball. You're coming in the summer. You're stepping into a system you've never played in, with coaches you've never played in, players you've never played with, and a conference you've never played in. And so you've got to learn your system. You've got to learn all the defenses in the league. You've got to develop some chemistry with your receivers. I mean, that's a big ask for the season kicks off in basically 3 months.
I think Russell Wilson all along the way has proven that he is the exception to every rule. And if people want to point at him as evidence of what can happen, that's fine. But yeah, it's a rarity. I would look at Joe more like a junior college transfer because he's got 2 years remaining. He's going to come in during the summer like a lot of junior college transfers do. And there are plenty of success stories there. So maybe that's a more apt comparison in terms of what to expect, because you're right. Grad transfers, there's just not a lot of guys who come in and are the difference makers. Really, it's more junior college transfers who make differences for teams as opposed to FBS transfers in their first year.
There are other exceptions. I mean, like Jake Rudock, who went from Iowa to Michigan. Like he had a good last season at Michigan. I mean, there are other exceptions to it. But my guess for Burrow would be not a huge season this year. I mean, their schedule starts tough. They play the Miami Hurricanes to open the season. That's your first easy game to ease yourself in as a neutral site game against the Miami Hurricanes. They've got they're at Auburn, their third game. They're at Florida, home for Georgia, play Alabama. I mean, that is not, you are not kind of easing yourself into the pool. You're diving in head first. And so I would expect him to have some rocky patches this year. But like you said, the big thing is he's got 2 years. So 2019, even if this year isn't great, 2019, he has, then he's been there for a year. He's played in the system for a year. He has the possibility of having a big fifth year, even if this year is kind of just okay.
Mm-hmm. And I think that would be a reasonable expectation and a reasonable progression for him. But I was looking at the last 4 years of passing yards for LSU, and last year was, I think it was like 2,600, which was pretty good. Every other year it's 2,200, 2,100, 2,100. So there's not a lot of just production there, and I think those are numbers that Burrow should be able to hit pretty easily. But then again, it goes back to LSU's offense as a whole and getting the most out of the receivers and the offensive line. Usually you get the most out of the running backs, and there's going to be somebody to run the ball. But I don't know. Do you think is Joe Burrow, and it's so odd because it's tough to answer this because we don't know. We're just projecting based on what little we've seen. But is he the best quarterback LSU has had in the last, half dozen years? I don't know.
I mean, maybe it's
right.
really hard to tell because they've had guys who rated pretty well. I mean, Ohio State wanted Brandon Harris when Brandon Harris was in high school, and then Brandon Harris goes there and wasn't very good, and then was a grad transfer to UNC last year and was a total disaster as a grad transfer to UNC. He had 1 touchdown and 8 interceptions last year for the Tar Heels. So, so does that mean that Brandon Harris was a bad quarterback, or does that mean that Brandon Harris was a highly rated quarterback that Ohio State thought was going to be pretty good and wanted, and then didn't get developed properly, and then when you're a grad transfer, it's really tough to go into a new situation and just, jump in and make an immediate impact as a starter in a place that, you've basically just parachuted into, 2-3 months earlier. I think that there's, they may have had some talented quarterbacks on the roster, but I think there are some player development issues there that, you've sort of, when you see the same issues playing out over and over again with different players, you start to wonder if maybe it might be a systemic issue rather than an issue with any particular player.
And when you have to go to Purdue for a quarterback to come in and start, it's you're in a bad way. And but you know what, Danny Etling got drafted and JT Barrett didn't, so I should just shut up about that. The quarterbacks that mean more to Ohio State now would be Dwayne Haskins and Tate Martell and Matthew Baldwin, and NJ.com, NewJersey.com, the newspaper there, last week or the week before, put out their quarterback rankings, and I'll do mine later in the year, later this summer at my positional rankings. But this is how they ranked. They had Ohio State number 5. It was Penn State 1, Michigan 2, Michigan State 3, Wisconsin 4, Ohio State 5, and then Iowa and on and on. And I'm looking at that thinking, well, there's no way Ohio State can be 5, but that's just an assumption that we have. I don't expect them to be 5 at the end of the season, but Tom, I don't know how easy it is to put them any higher. You can't put them ahead of McSorley. I would probably go Michigan State ahead of Michigan, but even Shea Patterson has experience. Then you've got Wisconsin at number 4 with what they've got and plenty of experience there. Like I said, I expect Haskins to be ahead of some of that at the end of the season. But can you? I mean, is this an acceptable ranking without seeing anything from Dwayne Haskins other than one half of football, basically?
This is one of these list things that I find it hard to get too worked up over. Mm-hmm. They seem to be basing a lot of it on experience, which if your methodology is valuing returning experience, then yep, you're going to put them behind a bunch of teams that have returning experience at the position. So, I think you could make a decent case that Ohio State belongs ahead of Wisconsin there. Alex Hornibrook is, he has experience last year. He threw 25 touchdowns and 15 interceptions last year. That's not great. So your congratulations, you're experienced. Your experience is that you're not a great quarterback. So, he had 2,600 yards, 25 touchdowns, 15 interceptions last year. That was Alex Hornibrook last year. I think there's a pretty decent possibility that Dwayne Haskins also throws 15 interceptions this year, but he does it with 1,000 more passing yards than that and 10 more touchdowns than that. Maybe, and it could be, you could tell me it was 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns more. He's going to make mistakes this year, but I think he's going to be a far more productive quarterback this year than Alex Hornibrook is, even if you want to go by, rate stats, you want to go yards per attempt or quarterback rating or anything like that. I would put my money on Haskins over Hornibrook. You mentioned Shea Patterson, Brian Lewerke from Michigan State potentially being ahead of Shea Patterson. I thought that's one of the notes I had as well. That Lewerke had a pretty good year last year, and Patterson is experienced, but he hasn't coached in this. He hasn't played in this system before. It's his first year. He's just got there this spring, so. I think everyone is looking at his recruiting rankings and going, wow, he's going to be an amazing quarterback. And, people are, kind of like a Heisman type candidate, if things break right. I think that's probably a little aggressive. He may a year from now, it may be like a Joe Burrow situation where he comes in the first year and it's just okay. And then next year with another year of experience, maybe he's a little better. He's still got a young receiving core. Their offensive line has some kind of question marks up front, and again, they're in the same boat where they've got a difficult schedule and difficult early schedule. So, it wouldn't surprise me if we, on September 30th, we're seeing what's wrong with Shea Patterson kind of articles, and the answer may be nothing. People's expectations were just a little out of whack.
Although, if you think about it, the longer a quarterback is with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, the worse he gets. So maybe you want that Heisman this year because next year he might be benched. What would have happened if Jake Rudock if that wouldn't have been his only year? He would have come back and then he would have been the Iowa Jake Rudock.
Playing quarterback for Jim Harbaugh is like some kind of a gypsy curse where it's just thinner and you just get worse. It's just interceptions and just slowly get worse and worse and waste away.
That's why with Patterson. You strike while the iron is hot there, and hopefully the stuff he was taught at Mississippi comes through because who knows what they're teaching at Michigan. Wilton Spate had a good 2016, 2017, even before his injury, he wasn't looking good. John O'Cornan, we might talk about this later on in the show, but he's just not very good at all. And the more they get coaching from Pep and Jim Harbaugh, it seems the worse these players get. So maybe what we see from Shea Patterson this year will be the best that we get. Brian Lewerke, I could argue that Haskins will put up better numbers than Patterson and Lewerke. We don't know exactly how explosive this Michigan offense is going to be, or it's going to be. There's going to be some run-based stuff, obviously. So maybe they're more power game, and maybe they top out at 3,000 yards passing. Lewerke, I think he was like 2,500 yards passing, 500 yards rushing last year. Basically, the poor man's Trace McSorley, I think. I could see Haskins. He should throw for over 3,000 yards. Maybe rushes for 100 or something like that. But I could see him putting up better numbers than Lewerke, better than Shea Patterson. And then I expect the rankings at the end of the season to be much different. And yeah, we don't get worked up about it. But to me, it's interesting because we expect, how do we measure these expectations? Same with Joe Burrow. We think we know, but how confident are we to put a number to it in terms of a ranking or an expectation? But I don't know. Do you where do you think he would rank in? Where do you think Haskins ends up this season in terms of production with the rest of the Big Ten quarterbacks?
I think the safest thing is you say Trace McSorley is number one. I mean, it's possible that without Joe Moorhead, without Saquon Barkley, that they take a step back there. I mean, you're losing. Now I'm blanking on the tight end who doesn't block. The real athletic freak tight end that they had that Ohio State really wanted.
I know who you're talking about.
Yep, good. As long as you do. Listeners, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about as well.
Gesicki.
Adam Bredeman. Mike Gesicki, yeah. I kept thinking Adam Bredeman, but he was the tight end they had before. Yes. Mike Gesicki. So you replace Gesicki, you're replacing Saquon Barkley. You lose Joe Moorhead, which is arguably the biggest of those three losses. That's he could take a little step back this year, but I think he's still the odds-on favorite to be the number one quarterback in the Big Ten. It would not shock me if Haskins was second. He could be second behind McSorley. He could be third behind McSorley and Lewerke. I would guess he ends up ahead of Patterson by the time the year is over. Mm-hmm. I would certainly put him ahead of Alex Hornibrook by the time the year is over. If Dwayne Haskins is a number one or number two quarterback in the Big Ten, Ohio State's having a real good season. If he's the best quarterback in the Big Ten, that's a 12-0 kind of year. If he's the second best quarterback in the Big Ten, that's an 11-1 kind of year, and you're probably looking at least a nervous wait on playoff selection day, if nothing else.
The other big Ohio State news, huge Ohio State news, was that Buffalo got added to the 2020 schedule, and Akron got added to the 2021 schedule. I looked on StubHub; those tickets are not yet on sale. They're probably trying to. They don't want to start a panic or a rush to break the internet. But those tickets will eventually be available. Then also what we always expected was the home and home with Texas got moved from 2022 to 2023 to 2025 and 2026. Texas also signed home and home with Alabama for 2022 and 2023. I think we may have talked about this in the past. There's no way Ohio State was going to play Texas and Notre Dame in the same season. So Ohio State and Notre Dame will stick with 2022 and 2023. But now that leaves Ohio State playing Texas and Washington in 2025. Do you think that schedule sticks?
I would guess that they might just shift that one Washington game back a couple of years, because the way they have it right now, you've got Oregon in 2021 and 2022, 2020 and 2021. I'm just going to say 20 and 21.
Yes.
You know what century it is. So you got Oregon in 20 and 21. You got Notre Dame in 22 and 23. You would then have Washington in 24. You go to Washington in 24. Then you go to Texas in 25. Texas at home in 26. And then potentially have Washington at home in 27. Because 26 and 27, your quote unquote marquee game that year is Boston College, which just picture the gif of the big fat guy with the glasses and the beard just doing the thumbs down. Like, yeah, that's that year's schedule. Hard pass, thank you. They split a series with Washington earlier. If you remember back, they played Washington at home in 2003, and then they didn't have a return trip to Washington until 2007. So it's happened in the past. It's actually happened in this series in the past. That wouldn't surprise me if they did that, because having just announced the Texas series, I would assume that they already have kind of, they have anticipated that, and they probably have something in motion with Washington, because just like you don't want to play Notre Dame and Texas the same year, you don't want to play Washington and Texas the same year. So that would be my guess as to how that gets resolved.
Especially with Chris Peterson at Washington, who will probably still be there at that time. So, and like you're saying, the 2027 schedule, it's just Boston College. That's almost as bad as this year's schedule. But TCU is much, I guess, pretty much a more prestigious name or more intriguing name. If it's Boston College, nobody really cares. So that would at least take care of that, and then you're talking 10 years out, and that's just too far to even talk about. Now, getting back to the Texas and Alabama thing, I think this is a sign with those two schools agreeing to a home and home in 2022 and 2023 that Nick Saban's last season at Alabama is going to be 2021, unless he decides in 2021 that he wants to keep coaching, in which case this home and home will move to a one-off neutral site game. I was looking today at Nick Saban's career road non-conference record at Alabama, and he is undefeated in his 11 seasons. He's 2-0 on the road in non-conference games. And so when I saw this matchup, this home and home being signed, my first thought was, well, he's not going to be there for that. Tom, is this about the end of Nick Saban 2021? Can we book it?
Did you arrive at that without seeing that I tweeted the same thing like 3 hours earlier?
No,
I saw you tweeted that like basically the same day I tweeted it, and I figured we had arrived at that independently, because boy, it sure does seem out of character for Alabama to schedule a big home and home with an out of conference team. That's not something Nick Saban likes to do. They have a very consistent scheduling philosophy, which is you schedule these non-conference games in neutral sites. You don't ever go to the other team's home stadium. And because you're doing that, you're scheduling them a little closer. You're not scheduling them 10 years out.
Yeah.
Ohio State scheduling the Texas series for 2026, or they've got Boston College on the schedule 9 years from now. Those games you're scheduling like a lot of times a year or two out, so you have a much better sense for who the other coach is going to be, what their roster is probably going to look like. Are they going to be replacing a star player?
Is Lamar Jackson going pro?
Yes, this year they're playing Louisville, and oh, what a coincidence! They're playing Louisville in the first game after Lamar Jackson leaves. What a shock that is! Their next 4 years are Louisville. They're playing them in Orlando. Then they play Duke in Atlanta, which boy, that's going to be a real fire, a real barn burner. Duke and Alabama. Then they play USC in Arlington, and they play Miami in Atlanta. So it's all kind of, other than Duke, it's kind of name brand-ish opponents. And if you just kind of glance through the schedule, it's like, yeah, okay, probably be pretty good. And then it always sort of works out that they're playing the team that's replacing its quarterback or has a new head coach. They played USC a couple years ago in Arlington in the season opener, and it was the clash of the college football titans, and you look at the two helmets together, it's like, oh, this is going to be great, and then it was 52-6 because USC had a new quarterback and a new coach, and so of course you killed them, and they did that to Michigan a couple of years earlier than that. That's just sort of been their recurring scheduling philosophy. So yeah, for there to be a break like this and to go to a home and home against a major national power like Texas, yeah, something's up. Nick Saban's not coaching. Nick Saban is not coaching in Arlington or in Austin for that game. I don't know whether that's because the game's going to get canceled or because Nick Saban's not coaching anymore. But Nick Saban's not coaching that game. Who were the two non-conference road wins. There was one in Penn State, and I can't think of the other one.
Yeah, 2010 it was Penn State. That was a home and home, and that was towards the end of Joe Paterno's era. That was, I believe, Penn State's quarterback for that game was Robert Bolden, and he may have been a true freshman, and he was a 5-star kid, but he ended up being a terrible quarterback who eventually transferred to LSU, by the way. The year before that, it was at Duke. They were finishing up, I believe, a home and home from before Nick Saban was there. So one of those games he got handed, and the other, the home and home, I'm pretty sure he was involved with, but you're picking on Joe Paterno in his second to last year at that point, and it's not much different than picking and choosing, a year and a half, 2 years in advance, like he's doing now with these neutral site games. But yeah, I agree. There's no way Nick Saban is in Austin for that game. Now, it might be because it's in Arlington or Georgia, more likely. A neutral site in Georgia rather than a neutral site in Arlington against Texas. That's what I would expect there. Because I honestly believe that's it. Like, unless he has a change of heart, I don't know if 2021 will be his last year, but 2022 he won't be there. That's what I get from this.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty good guess. He's older than you think he is. He's been around. I mean, he was a coach. He was an assistant coach under Earl Bruce at Ohio State in 1981 or something like that. I mean, that's 5 years before Urban Meyer was a grad assistant. So that's, he's got, I think he's 8 years older or 10 years older than Urban Meyer. So, and Urban's probably not going to coach quite as long as Nick Saban, to the same age that Nick Saban coaches. But yeah, I don't think he's going to go much. I like we said, he's not going to be there in 2022, almost certainly. One thing that I looked at was next year they're playing Duke. Duke is their big marquee non-conference matchup. So who else are they playing? Are they playing someone else who's kind of decent? Nope. Duke on the neutral site game, New Mexico State, Southern Mississippi, and then Western Carolina. So that's a third of Alabama's regular season schedule next year. They won't get punished for it. No, they won't. And I mean, Ohio State can't really talk next year. Ohio State's not a non-conference schedule next year is pretty garbage. They play what is almost certainly going to be a post-Lane Kiffin Florida Atlantic team and Cincinnati and Miami. So that's, two teams that theoretically could be, you could have some spillover talent at FAU. Luke Fickell could have Cincinnati on the upswing, but you're not playing any brand name teams there. So it's not neither one is great. Yeah, but this is where Shannon would come in and say that's what the TCU game was supposed to be there. That's true. It was supposed to be there. And if you're wondering, by the way, why Ohio State's playing Florida Atlantic and then they're playing an out of conference home and home with Boston College, Florida Atlantic used to have their AD, not their current one, but the previous one, the one who hired Lane Kiffin, was Pat Chun, who worked under Gene Smith at Ohio State. He's out at Washington State now. And Boston College's AD now is Martin Jarmond. He used to be in charge of scheduling at Ohio State, and he's now the AD at Boston College. So there are personal connections there that probably have facilitated some of these series happening. So that's, if you're wondering why there's a Boston College series on the schedule, that personal connection there between Gene Smith and Martin Jarmond is probably one of the things that helped facilitate that. Like the scheduling person should, if they're going to take an AD job somewhere, like their last act at Ohio State should be to schedule that and then go. Just as a coincidence, now I'm going to also take this job. Also, Ohio State's coming to our town, and we can maybe get a chance to beat them. That has not that exact thing, but the connection between Ohio State people and former Ohio State people has played out in the past too. Ben Jay used to be the AD at Hawaii. That's one of the reasons Hawaii came here in 2015 or something when they just had a one-off game like that. That was kind of a weird opponent, but there was a connection there as well. So. That's a nice thing to be able to deliver to your new job as the new AD at Boston College. Look, I'm bringing Ohio State to town. That's a pretty big a pretty big thing to deliver. I wonder where that game's going to be played, because, I mean, that's Alumni Stadium on Chestnut Hill. That's like 40-something thousand seats. That's like 44,000. It's one of the smaller Power 5 stadiums. I wonder if they're going to have to move that to the Patriot Stadium or something, because, I mean,
I would think so.
You're going to have 20,000 Ohio State fans there, so, and I'm sure that's going to be a pretty hot ticket for Boston College people. You're almost going to have to move that off campus.
Aren't the Terps playing Texas off campus this year?
They are. They're playing at the Redskins Stadium this year in the opening week. Yep.
And, talking about Nick Saban, I'm looking forward to when Dabo Swinney is negatively recruiting against Alabama because of Saban's age. I mean, it has to start happening at some point, which the recruiting then leads me to Michigan last week put out some recruiting materials using their defensive coordinator Don Brown and defensive line coach Greg Madison. They superimposed their heads over Hawk and Animal of the Road Warriors of the Legion of Doom, and it's, for one, it's disturbing, but two, that's a Buckeye dad in there, James Laurinaitis' dad, Joe, who they're using without permission, mind you, in their recruiting materials. So, I would say this is the most tone-deaf thing they've done, but obviously it's not, because you've got Ed Warner using past Buckeye players and offensive linemen for their recruiting materials for Ed Warner. Now they've got a Buckeye dad, and James Laurinaitis didn't like it. His dad didn't like it. And this is all, and they've got, you look at in terms of wrestling tag teams, you've got the Steiner brothers, who actually attended Michigan, who would wear the Block M and varsity jackets to the ring, but instead they go with the Legion of Doom, and it's more I don't know. I already said tone deaf, but there's some cluelessness to the Michigan recruiting machine that never fails to entertain us.
Yeah, there's a social media person there that just thought it was just that those guys were going on a road trip, and they thought, aha, there was a wrestling tag team called the Road Warriors, and there was literally not one thought beyond that. No one. It was someone who did not think about the fact that there was an Ohio State tie there. And I mean, really, you think about the age of the people who are generally doing social media for a lot of these places. You know, they were probably, there's a decent chance they were in middle school or high school when James Laurinaitis was at Ohio State. So they probably just didn't know and didn't think about it, and no one there caught it before they sent it out. You know, I liked your suggestion about the Steiners. I mean, there's the Michigan tie there, and it's a really natural fit, because I went back and looked, and the Steiners also have not won a championship since the 90s. So, I mean, I think it's a really natural fit for Michigan to tie their brand there, but they didn't do that.
That's good stuff, Tom. So then I was wondering, like, you know, what's their next thing that they're going to do? Like, you know, put out some recruiting materials and say, like, come play in the same conference as two-time Heisman winner Archie Griffin, or like what other, you know, how else can they put their social foot in their social mouth? And there are Michigan fans who get annoyed, can't stand the director of recruiting there, Matt Dudek, who we may have talked about this in a recent show, making fun of Michigan fans who don't like the fact that Michigan is signing 3-star guys and recruiting 3-star guys, and the recruiting has dipped a bit. And I say a bit; it's dipped considerably, but it's kind of almost a toxic situation between the fan base and the people inside the Michigan building right now.
It is, and that is purely a function of results. Because, I mean, you said Dudek, when they were in Paris a couple weeks ago, I forget what the restaurant was, but there was some restaurant that was, you know, it was like Le Recrutement or something like that. And, you know, he tweeted something about, you know, Michigan fans were only going to give this one 3.5 stars, or they were going to complain about it, or, you know, something like that. But his personality and his tweets, if they were recruiting at a top 5 level, they wouldn't care. That would just be, that would be a just his character coming through and his personality shining through, and he's got this wonderful, quirky, unique sense of humor. But if you're when you're recruiting guys from the night shift at the German defensive line factory, then then all of a sudden it's not so funny, and you need to do your job and shut up. So that is, the dislike for him is a solely results-based thing rather than a personality thing, I think.
It's funny because I reminded me of like Michigan Monday. You started Michigan Monday, and then I took over in 2006, and then I was doing it for the Rich Rod years. And Michigan fans, there was a turn. They stopped liking it for a time during the Rich Rod years. They didn't like me because I guess I wasn't writing positively enough about the Rich Rodriguez Michigan Wolverines. And so they didn't like it as much as they did in, say, like 2005 or 2006 when they're ranked number 2 in the nation. It's funny how that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was always a very well-read column or well-read article from everyone up north, but it was much more well-read from people in Ohio when they lost, and much more well-read from people in Michigan when they won. So, yeah, I don't know how much more positive you could have been during the Rich Rod era. I'm positive Stephen Threet's going to lead them to upwards of 3 wins this year. Count them. Nick Sheridan, next Heisman winner. Who's to say? Maybe.
Right. Could Justin Fagan be the next Pat White? No.
Well, it depends on how you mean that. I mean, he's a person, so in that way.
Speaking of Michigan, Charles Woodson recently, said that Michigan isn't taking the game seriously enough or not focused on it as much as they should be. They're treating it like another game. And you tweeted that. What was your tweet about the John Cooper thing?
Something about it was in response to Woodson saying that Harbaugh wasn't treating the Michigan game seriously enough, or the Ohio State Michigan game seriously enough, and it was something like for $7 million a year, I bet Michigan didn't think they were getting their version of John Cooper, which is, I mean, that's basically what he's saying. It's that they're not putting the emphasis on this game that they should have, which was always the complaint when Cooper was in Ohio State.
And that's a dagger right to the heart, that comparison. And you look at that's why last year was so important for Michigan to get that win, because it's going to be tough this year. And if you go 0-4 in the series, that's a large part of your legacy. But he's telling the players. He talked to them last year. Woodson did, and basically he said this year while talking to the media, the players need to have this arrogance about them, be cockier about their place where it concerns Ohio State, but there's no proof of that. I mean, these players have never seen that. They don't. I mean, they've heard about it. There's probably 8mm film of it. But this is not something that they've experienced. It would be like telling them, go run through that brick wall. But, back in my day, we would just run through it and it wouldn't even faze us. But these players, they don't believe, they're not going to run full speed into that brick wall because they don't believe that they're actually going to run through it. And that's probably, that's harsh in terms of their view of the rivalry. But they don't have the same expectations right now that Ohio State has. They have hopes. Ohio State has expectations, and you see which one's been getting the results.
Well, what does Rashawn Gary have to go back, fall back on? Take him for an example. This is his 3rd year at Michigan. He was in preschool when Jim Tressel was hired at Ohio State. He was 3? He at least a couple of years away from kindergarten when Jim Tressel was hired. So in the entire time that Rashawn Gary has been, aware that football is a thing, Michigan has won this game twice. And one of them was when he probably was in kindergarten in 2003. I mean, that's probably, I don't want to go back and do the math, but that's about right. Probably when he was in kindergarten, and then they won once when he was, I don't know, probably a freshman in high school, 8th grade, something like that, and that's it. And so, yes, Michigan can to Charles Woodson. It seems very natural that Michigan's place is above Ohio State because when Charles Woodson was there, that's where it was. They beat them every year. But for anyone who's at this age, it's Ohio State has lost to Purdue more than they've lost to Michigan in the time that any of these people can remember. So, should everyone at Purdue believe that their place is ahead of Ohio State in the Big Ten? I mean, that's just not. It just isn't that. It doesn't reflect reality, and we've discussed before that the Michigan mindset in a lot of places doesn't necessarily reflect reality as it has played out on the field. I mean, can anyone on the Michigan team, were they in first grade, second grade, the last time they won the Big Ten? That's a long time. I mean, it doesn't seem like that long ago if you're old like we are, but if you're 20 years old, you were. What, it was 2004, so you were 6 the last time Michigan won the Big Ten, and that wasn't even they won, beat Ohio State and went to the Rose Bowl. That was they got pummeled in Columbus, and they did end up going to the Rose Bowl, but they got pummeled in Columbus in that Ted Ginn punt return and Troy Smith going crazy on them, and then they backed into the Rose Bowl and then lost to Texas. So. And that's the good old days. You lost to Ohio State, but you got to go to the Rose Bowl anyway, and you lost. And that's the good old days, and that's 14 years ago. So, I don't know where the mindset that they, these current players are supposed to, be getting that that their place is ahead of Ohio State because they haven't seen it.
Yeah, and Woodson is coming from a place he played in 95, 96, 97. 97, they were better than Ohio State. 95 and 96, Ohio State was better. They didn't care. They believed they were better. Michigan was better. They believed Michigan was better than Ohio State, and they showed it on the field. That was just the attitude they had there. But that attitude only lasts so long if it stops happening, and it definitely has stopped happening.
And that attitude goes back to the years before when Charles Woodson was in high school. Michigan was upsetting an unbeaten Ohio State team in 1993. They were completely firebombing Ohio State in 1991. They won 4 years in a row, 88-91. There was a tie in 92. They beat them again in 93. Ohio State won in 94, but that was like this bizarre fluke that Ohio State beat Michigan at that point. So, that the expectation at that point was based on that history. The thing that struck me about this more than anything was if you're arguing that Michigan is not beating Ohio State because Jim Harbaugh doesn't understand the rivalry, who is Michigan going to get to be their head coach that understands the rivalry more than Jim Harbaugh? He was the starting quarterback under Bo who guaranteed a win and then won the game. Like that would be like saying, well, Ohio State needs someone who understands the game. Chris Spielman just doesn't understand. Like what? Like who are you going to get that understands this? It is the series recently is a function of talent and coaching. Ohio State has had better players. You go back to the recruiting rankings. Ohio State has very consistently recruited better than Michigan every single year. That's why they're winning. They have better coaches. That's why they're winning. He's kind of, I think, kind of retconning it that it's just because we haven't been trying our hardest. We haven't been paying our attention as much as we should. Like, you go back to the John Cooper years, Ohio State had more talented teams a lot of those years, at least in the mid-'90s. In the early 90s, Michigan did have better players, and that's why they were winning. But those mid-'90s teams, 90, 93, 95, 96, those were teams that Ohio State had the better team that year. I mean, you can look at the recruiting rankings, you can look at the on-field product in the other games. Ohio State had a better record in all those years, and then they lost. That's when you get the conversation about the coach isn't putting the right amount of emphasis on it or doesn't understand it or just can't handle it. I mean, that's where that conversation comes from. When you have not as talented teams that are also not playing well in other games, it's not like Michigan's had better records in Ohio State in any of these years. They've had worse records. They've had not as good recruiting rankings, not as good results in other games. I mean, I probably don't need to draw you a map to Ohio State is winning because they have better players and better teams.
You ask who could do a better job, the first name that comes to mind is Mark D'Antonio. But then I'm thinking, well, I was going to ask, what would Michigan's record be against Ohio State the last 3 years with Mark D'Antonio at Michigan? But he's had better talent at Michigan State than Michigan has had, and that's why the Spartans have had success against the Buckeyes. So, like you said, it goes back to the talent. And I think Michigan has done – Jim Harbaugh has done pretty well against Ohio State without the amount of talent that you would have thought he would have had. And then that goes back to recruiting. Looking at the college, some of the college football magazines are out now. Athlon's out, so I bought that. And they've got the top 40 Big Ten recruits, Big Ten signees of 2018 from the 24/7 composite. And Michigan has one guy in the top 20, and the rest is basically Ohio State, and then maybe like 7 Penn State guys. And you go back to like Jim Harbaugh's first year where he made Jake Rudock this pretty good quarterback, and Michigan fans are talking about the development that Jim Harbaugh does for his players. I was talking about it too because we saw it at Stanford where you would take these 2-star guys, these 3-star guys, and turn them into NFL players. It wasn't all of them. It was just the ones you saw get drafted in the NFL. And it's not like we were also watching Stanford because it's out west. You don't see much of it. But now that Michigan is under the microscope, you see that not every 2-star guy becomes an NFL player. Not every 3-star guy does. But half the guys that you recruit have to contribute in some way. And if they're not, then you're going to get beaten. You're going to get beat by the teams where they have that percentage and they have that production. And the way things are going recruiting now for Michigan, it's not improving. And Penn State is improving. I mean, they got 2 5-star commits this week alone, and outside linebacker Brandon Smith and running back Devin Ford. Both were being recruited by Ohio State. Devin Ford was sort of cut loose because the Buckeyes have the running backs they want, and they're still in on, a guy like Noah Cain that they like more. Brandon Smith was a Virginia kid who just wanted to be a Nittany Lion. You can't fault him for that. So business is picking up for Penn State, and it is not doing the same for Michigan. And Michigan needs results, Tom, in order to flip this stuff.
Yeah, you look at the recruiting rankings the last few years, it has very consistently been Ohio State 1, Penn State 2, Michigan 3. And at the end of the year, when you look at the Big Ten East standings, it has very consistently been Ohio State and Penn State 1 and 2 in some order, and then Michigan 3. And, last year they were 4th because Michigan State had a pretty good year, and Michigan blew some games they probably shouldn't have blown because they had pretty serious quarterback issues. It is, there's a lot of talk about, recruiting rankings don't matter, and, look at Michigan State. They don't have great recruiting rankings, and they play consistently pretty well. And that's true, but, Michigan State, first of all, develops its players very well, which is not something you can necessarily say about Michigan. Michigan State is also, Urban Meyer has basically said that they look at the guys Michigan State is recruiting because Michigan State does a very good job evaluating guys, especially in some of those line positions and finding some of those under-the-radar guys. So you have to bring in better talent. I mean, it's the old axiom. It's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmies and Joes. You need to have top-level talent to compete at a top level. And if Michigan is very consistently a level below Ohio State and Penn State in recruiting, and they don't have this wonderful player development system where they're just, they're getting the absolute most out of these guys and very consistently turning, 3-star guys into all-conference players and all-American players, you can't keep up. It is not a coincidence that you go back through, the previous 5 years recruiting rankings, and the college football playoff teams are almost all teams that are recruiting in the top 10 every year. And Michigan has some years been doing that and some years not. But if you're not doing it consistently and you're consistently very far behind Ohio State, you're not going to be able to compete. You can have one down cycle. You cannot have 4 cycles in a row where you're just getting killed by your biggest rival, because it just plays out on the field, and then it turns into because you're getting killed on the field, the next year's kids go to Ohio State instead of Michigan. I mean, think about it. Ohio State and Michigan have not had that many head-to-head recruiting battles in recent years because they're going after different kids, and it's not that they're going for completely different styles of offensive linemen or completely different linebackers. Ohio State is just, if you look at the top 5, top 5 lists for all these kids who are in the top 100, Ohio State's on like all of them, and Michigan is in on very few of them. I think Ohio State had, if you just took Ohio State's class and Michigan's class, I think Ohio State had 14 of the top 15 rated recruits in the 2018 class between Ohio State and Michigan. Like, you can't, that is not a sustainable thing if you want to be competitive with Ohio State long term. Something has to change there very quickly, because it's going to get real out of hand pretty soon if he doesn't get it turned around. Especially
when the development isn't there like we thought it would be. Since we've spent like 20 minutes on Michigan, we should probably go to episode 6 of All or Nothing now, which I thought was kind of a boring episode. There wasn't as much hilarity to it, and sometimes, a lot of times with shows, Tom, I know you know this, like you've got to have the highs and the lows. And after last week's hilarity, they're like, we got to bring people back down. We can't keep them up at this high, and we got to let them calm down again before the hilarity ramps back up with the Wisconsin and Ohio State games in the last 2 episodes.
Yeah, first of all, there was not enough John O'Corn. John O'Corn is my Poochie in this show. When John O'Corn is not on screen, all the other characters should be asking, "Where's John O'Corn?" Because John O'Corn, as we said last week, John O'Corn is the absolute comic mastermind of the entire show. He's not trying to be, but he is just, it is magical. But yeah, I was right there with you. This was an episode where I was watching, and I just kind of go, oh, how much time is left in this episode? And I looked, and I'm 15 minutes into a 44-minute episode. Like, how are we still not there? This was the episode where they played Minnesota and who else? Someone else that was terrible that they beat.
Maryland,
that's right. Yeah, Minnesota and Maryland. So it's 2 games against crap teams, and it doesn't really matter. And they weren't like exciting games. They just kind of ran over both of them. So the football game action wasn't exciting, and it was like, okay, well, we shot this stuff with this academic counselor, so we've got to use it somewhere. So all right, we're going to throw 5 minutes of that here in the middle of this episode. And, we're going to have Brandon Peters sitting in a living room with his parents for a while. Like, it was just kind of like, all right, we're going to throw a bunch of crap in here, and we'll just, we promised Amazon 7 episodes, so by golly, they're going to get 7 episodes. We have 6 good episodes. Here's your 7 episodes.
Last week we were like, it was a 34-minute episode, and it flies by, and you're like, oh, I need more. And then, like you said, this one, I'm like, how much longer? 44 minutes? Are you crazy? And then you're like, well, now how much longer? Now how much longer? It was a bit of a chore, and because so much of it is off the field stuff, like you said, the academic, the Brandon Peters, and there's just something when John O'Corn is on the screen, he steals the show. He's Woody Boyd from Cheers. He's Kramer from Seinfeld. He's the guy that, when he enters, everybody should clap. When he enters, we should all yell, O'Corn. There's nothing like him.
You said earlier you were talking about some tweet that you had made that you thought was really clever, and then realized a bunch of people had said it. At some point when I was watching last week, I thought about the John O'Corn interception that he just like threw up in the air and just hung there in the air, and Damon Webb intercepted it in the Ohio State game. And I thought, oh, it was a can O'Corn, just like the old baseball term. And I tweeted it, and then I looked, and I was like, oh, this was probably literally trending during that game. Like, I searched can O'Corn. It was like, oh, like 57 other people tweeted this during the Ohio State-Michigan game, and I apparently just wasn't paying attention for some reason. So
that's an O'Corny joke.
I thought it was it was an O'Corny joke. I thought I was very clever, and then 1,000 people had beaten me to the same O'Corny joke. So, one of the things that I thought was interesting this episode was, like they just came out and like addressed, like Brandon Peters has this reputation as kind of just being a little bit of a, I don't know if weird is the right word, but just kind of a different kind of guy. And, you know, a lot of times you'll hear that about players, and it's just kind of like he's doesn't quite fit in with all the other guys on the team or whatever. And it generally doesn't get talked about very much. And they just, in this episode, just kind of came out like, hey, your new quarterback's kind of a weirdo, huh? And, you know, Jim Harbaugh is like, yeah, he listens a lot. He doesn't talk much. He just listens. He takes it all in. Like, I thought that was just very interesting that they just came out and like, you know, O'Korn is the guy with the last chance. This is his last chance to make good. And Wilton Spate is the guy who's coming back and, you know, trying to come back from an injury. And Brandon Peters is the guy who's kind of a weirdo who sits in a room with his parents and talks about football. Like, that's interesting character development there to just paint him as kind of the weirdo.
The beginning of the show starts off with Jim Harbaugh saying, sometimes I'm not clear. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. Good. I like the self-awareness there. There was one point, where they're talking about the personality and how he needs to speak up as quarterback, out there. And tell me, is this what Jim Harbaugh said? That he said that your quarterback personality needs to be louder than lashes?
I don't know. I didn't write that one down. I don't know. That seems very much like the kind of random thing he would come up with, but I don't remember that.
Is that even a saying? I mean, if it is, it probably should no longer be a saying. But
seems vaguely problematic. Yes.
I like when Pep said, after the whatever game where he went in, where Peters went in and played well. It might have been after that game, before the Minnesota game. Pep was like, you responded just like I knew you would. And I'm thinking, then why is John O'Korn starting? Like, if this is exactly what you expected to happen, why are you putting John O'Korn out there?
Well, they wanted to give him some adversity to have to fight back from, see? Because if it was undefeated, then it would be too easy. They wanted to test his grit and his mettle, obviously. They had to give him something to come back off of. I mean, if you go back to those early discussions, in the beginning of the season, Brandon Peters was not in the quarterback discussion when they were deciding who was going to start against Florida. It was Wilton Spate and John O'Korn. That was not what about Brandon Peters? Like, you didn't hear his name until pretty much the last two episodes.
You're right. They probably did it for drama. Like, my wife watches 90 Day Fiancé on TLC, and she gets mad when there's no drama. Like, yeah, this couple actually loves each other. They're financially viable. They're a good pair. She wants the ones where the lady comes over from Russia and the guy has lied about his criminal record, and there's just constant drama and arguing, and they hate each other. That's the more entertaining show. And nobody wants to see Brandon Peters lead Michigan to a 12-0 season.
I would love to judge your wife's TV viewing habits, but I watch a lot of Mets games, so I probably am not the person to be able to judge her wasting her life watching terrible TV, because obviously. Speaking of financially viable, I watched Karan Higdon get into his shiny white Camaro and thought, boy, if there was an Ohio State football show, how many Michigan message board posters would be doing the $U thing about an Ohio State player getting into a shiny white Camaro on campus?
Yeah, he's just a successful single dad.
This is how these things go. It would be suspicious normally, but we all know Michigan doesn't cheat, so obviously, therefore, QED.
One of the other things I wrote down was Brandon Peters' parents saying, may have been after the first start, this is just the beginning. And I'm thinking at that point, was Jim Harbaugh already on the phone to Ole Miss?
He certainly. I think they probably had been watching film, if nothing else, by that point. Yeah, they're like, oh, this is. Yeah, what else is out there? The waiter gives you the specials. It's like, oh, that sounds good. What else do you have?
Do you have another
menu?
Else
that you have. Speaking of deep cuts off the menu, it was very exciting to see Kareem Walker in this episode. I don't think we've seen him yet, and he was on the sidelines in some of the shots. The former Ohio State running back commit who then ended up committing to Michigan and and playing there, and has been. I would say he's played sparingly throughout his career, but he was in the show and several of the shots on the sideline during the Minnesota game, so that was exciting to see Kareem.
As he also watched Karan Higdon and Chris Evans rush for like 400 yards.
37 carries, 371 yards. So,
that's not bad.
Yeah, and it was interesting. They sort of portrayed it as Peters. They're shooting Peters' dad watching the game, and so they put a lot of focus on Peters. And I don't remember him having that big of a game that game. I remember them running, but I went back and looked, and he was 8 of 13 for 56 yards. And I think we saw every single one of those completions. It's like you're seeing these like 3-yard dump offs to the tight end. It's like, why are we seeing that? That's weird. So, but yeah, if you when you run for 10 yards a carry, you don't. It turns out you don't need to throw the ball that much.
I think it was that game. Pep was like, "You want to throw it on first down?" And then he's like, "No, let's not get foolish." And then they run the ball again, and it goes for a big game or a big touchdown. It was also funny where Brandon Peters is on the sideline. He doesn't know how to use the phone to talk to Pep up in the booth. They're like, "Just put it to your ear." What? Just put it to your ear.
Yeah, that was exciting. Like, of course, I mean, for someone who's, I mean, how old is he? He's probably 20 now, so born in 1998, something like that. I mean, one of those, handset corded phones is basically like you and I using one of those ones with the old timey one where the receiver and the mouthpiece are separate, and you put the you pick up the receiver off the hook and
little House on the Prairie phone.
Yeah, exactly. Give me Klondike 5223. Yeah, that's what you have to do on the Michigan sidelines. You have to pick up the phone. You have to connect to the operator and have them connect you to Klondike 5.
Fielding Yost used this phone.
That was good. The other moment that I really enjoyed was prior to the Maryland game. Jim Harbaugh brought in his brother John, the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, in to give the team a pep talk, and he was talking about the kind of players that they look for with the Baltimore Ravens, and he said, "We want football players. We want to win." It's like, well, yeah, really. Hang on, let me write that down. So you as a football coach are looking for guys who like to play football and are football players because in service of your end goal of winning football games. Okay, hang on, let me write this down. I'm so glad you told me. I was way off on what you were trying to do here.
And he's the more eloquent Harbaugh brother.
He is, like, they're speaking, like, you hear them speak kind of back to back, and you kind of hear like some similar speaking. I don't know if it's just like some like real subtle regional accent or something, but it's like you can hear in their voices that they're brothers. They have some commonalities in the way they speak. But yeah, it's like he is the more human Harbaugh brother, and he's just he's a football coach who wants football players to win football games. Good. Thank you.
He's talking to the team, and they're showing him, and I'm thinking, I bet that I wrote down like these players probably wish that he was their coach, and then I'm listening to him talk, and I'm like, no, it's just football cliches, and he wants football players, and they're all just as bored by it as they would be if it was Jim Harbaugh talking.
Can you show me something that's not a Harbaugh? Can you waiter? Will you bring out the dessert cart and just something that's not a Harbaugh, please?
Can we get Don Brown back here? Again, I'll take another helping of Don Brown, please.
A little more Don Brown and a little more John O'Corn in this episode would have been fantastic. Because this week it was Tim Drevno was the assistant they focused on, and it was just like, yep, that's yep, okay, well He has kids, so he can relate to the kids. And, yep, okay, good. That was, yep. What's Don Brown doing right now? Can we go talk to him?
I'm thinking a Hardcastle.
I'm eating effing dinner. What do you want?
I'm thinking a Hardcastle and McCormick remake with Don Brown and John O'Corn. Where, O'Corn lives under Don Brown's care, and then they for some reason, go solve mysteries. And I would watch the hell out of that show every week.
Absolutely. We should put in the comments of this post on the Ozone, or tweet to us, what would the name of the Don Brown, John O'Corn like buddy cop or detective show be? Yeah, I want good suggestions on this. We'll have to think about this. Because this definitely, when I write the screenplay for episode 1 this week, I wanna have a good working title.
It makes me mad that I don't have time to think about it right now, and we've got to do the show.
This is why we outsource this to our listeners. We're providing you 17 hours of podcasting content this week. We're asking for one thing in return: give us a good Don Brown, John O'Corn TV show name.
See, what I would like to do is just sit silently for like 7 minutes and think of stuff, and then we'll come back to the show. Now, this is a topic that we could work with, maybe for the summer, definitely. Anything else on All or Nothing? I think that about taps me out on the show.
Yeah, that's all I had. We can go to listener questions now. Would you like me to read the listener questions since Shannon's not here? Since that's normally one of his tasks.
Do you promise to stumble over some words? I'm sorry, Shannon.
I can't promise to try, but I'll try to try. All right. First question from not James Vogel, which ironically he is James Vogel. He's at not James Vogel on Twitter. Who should replace Larry Culpepper? The Dr. Pepper announced this week that they're getting rid of their absolutely horrendous vending guy character. So I loved your suggestion on Twitter, so I'm going to let you take this one.
What was it? Captain
Buckeye. I mean, I saw that and I was like, nope, I'm not going to top that one. So, I mean, he's always on TV, despite being universally hated. He's dressed like a clown, drives a ridiculous vehicle, and he's always trying to push a product, whether it's soda or photos and autographs, on everyone around him, even if they don't want it. I mean, it seems like you don't even need to change the writing. You write the character the same way. It's just, one annoying clown steps out and another one steps in.
I don't. Was that even me? I don't even remember tweeting that.
I thought it wouldn't be the first time you got credit for something someone else did, but
you're right. That was my tweet.
The other thing that I thought of, as soon as the Larry Culpepper thing came out, it reminded me of the episode of The Simpsons where Homer fakes his own death, and then Patty and Selma make a gravestone for Homer that says, Homer Simpson, we are richer for having lost him. That's how I feel about Larry Culpepper. We are richer for having lost him in our lives.
Yeah, as far as I was thinking of replacement, I like Little Sweet, the creepy little cowboy from the Diet Dr. Peppers, or you could go back to the original, one of the originals, and Scott Baio. Do you want to be a pepper? Those were pretty awesome back in the day. But yeah, I think maybe the first selection that I came up with, that I tweeted, Buckeye guy, that's a good one. For all of the reasons that I tweeted that Tom talked about.
And I'm now questioning myself. It might have been Gus Vogel who was the person who actually asked us. I'm now wondering if maybe it was his thing. So I'm scrolling back through his timeline right now.
No, it sounds like something I would have tweeted.
Yeah, I mean, except it was funny, so maybe not. I don't know. We'll look. Anyway. He tweets a lot, so Gus, I'm sorry if you tweet too much. I haven't gone all the way back through your timeline, but it might have been you. I'm going to give you credit since it seemed too clever for Gerd. All right, next question from Nezzy21 on Twitter: has Ohio State installed the hidden player trick play package for Tate Martell?
Now this offends me. Now this is a Michigan fan, Tom, and I'm sure you are as offended as I am about this. Michigan fans love to talk about Tate Martell's height. But what they will never talk about, and what you cannot hide with any sort of hidden trick, is the size of his heart, Tom.
I saw that and I thought, that's weird to say that about Tate Martell because he's listed at 5'11", and normally you see this this type of play run with shorter players. So,
right.
You
don't run it with running backs.
Right, exactly. Well, I think I remember Kansas State running something like that with Darren Sproles, but he's 5'6", so that's Tate Martell's obviously much taller than that. Mm-hmm. So. If you're listed at 5'11", obviously you're 5'11", so I'm not sure that's a great fit.
Half the time, 5'11" guys are 6 foot.
Exactly. I wouldn't be if we want to take this seriously for a minute. I wouldn't be surprised if they ran some kind of a trick play with him, like line him up as a running back or stick him in the slot somewhere. I mean, and even if you just throw him the ball out in the slot. Just the threat of him passing probably screws the defense up. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you might see a defense just take a timeout just if he lines up out there. So that wouldn't completely shock me. I don't know if they'll do that just because like we've talked about, they only have 2 healthy scholarship quarterbacks on the depth chart, so maybe you can't take a chance of him being out in the slot and getting, Ray Small against Minnesota. But yeah, if you were going to use him in a trick play, that's the type of thing it wouldn't shock me to see something like that at some point this year.
They should do it against Oregon State just to make everybody else worry about it.
Because Oregon State's not going to have anyone that can do anything about it. So
exactly.
Where's the safest place in the stadium on the field as an offensive player against Oregon State?
Don't want to be in the end zone though. It's going to be crowded there. A lot of guys jumping around.
I looked at the line for that game. Ohio State's a 32-point favorite or 32.5-point favorite against Oregon State. The Alabama-Louisville game that Alabama is, this is Alabama's big quality non-conference game. Alabama's a 31-point favorite. So, that's just when you're hearing people talk about Alabama's quality win over Louisville later this year, that just keep that in mind that the talent gap there is probably about the same. So. And
then also when Alabama doesn't cover, then Louisville must be pretty good.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just a testament to how good Louisville is. All right, next one from a great handle. This one, I think this was from the board. Parliament Buckadelic. That is a fantastic handle. Who throws for more yards this year, Dwayne Haskins or Joe Burrow? I have a strong opinion here, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'm going Haskins simply because you look at the. I was looking at what Ohio State quarterbacks have been throwing for the starting quarterbacks, and they're all. Last year was 3,000. Year before that, 2,500. JT in 2014 was 2,800 in 11 and a half games. So I'm putting the bar at right around 3,000 yards for Dwayne Haskins. And LSU's offense doesn't scream 3,000 yards passing to me. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Haskins over Burrow.
Yep, that's where I am as well. 2 years ago, J.T. Barrett outpassed Danny Etling by about 400 yards. Last year, he outpassed him by about 600 yards. So, and if anything, I think you're going to see more passing yards this year from Ohio State than last year. So, it wouldn't surprise me if Haskins ends up somewhere in that 3,000 to 3,500 kind of yards, especially if they're playing a couple playoff games. It would not shock me at all for Haskins to hit 3,500 yards passing this year. So, yeah, I think Haskins is a pretty safe bet there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. And that's I put the bar at 3,000, but for me that's a little low. But I don't want to. What we were talking about earlier, I don't want to expect too much because we have only seen so little.
Yeah. Okay. Next question from @BrockDoctor on Twitter. What does A to B 4 to 6 mean specifically?
Specifically, A to B, from point A to point B, just get there as fast as you can. And 4 to 6 means 4 to 6 seconds of relentless effort at the snap of the ball, and you just go. So you go from point A to point B as fast as you can, and then from the 4 to 6 seconds that the play is lasting, you're going as fast as you can, as hard as you can, as relentless as you can, and that's A to B, 4 to 6 in a nutshell.
There you go. Well done. Next question, and you didn't have a name on this one.
Smartwater.
Smartwater. Oh, well, of course it's Smartwater. We can't have a show without Smartwater asking a question. Is this firmly Haskins' team now? Will the vet step aside for him after 4 years of Barrett? I always place huge emphasis on off-season leadership. Did the Michigan game cement him as the leader already, or does he have to reestablish it?
I'll let you start on this one if you want.
To me, I think if you're the starting quarterback and you're the unquestioned starting quarterback, you're gonna be the lead, one of the leaders of the team. I don't know if he's gonna be a captain this year. Maybe not. But I think that with the transfer of Joe Burrow, that kind of removes any uncertainty around the position. And I think he'll be, everyone knows who's going to be taking the starting snaps against Oregon State and against TCU, barring injury at this point. So there's no question that he's going to be your starting quarterback. He has that little bit of track record and coming in under pressure and performing well at Michigan last year. So you've got, I think, and guys have seen him in practice. He's got an impressive arm. He has the tools. He's got the size. he's the type of player that I think you can, he's physically imposing enough, and he has the track record that kind of, commands respect, I think. So, in terms of being like a vocal leader, that may be something that he's sort of developing, but, just sort of being viewed as a leader on the team, I would certainly think he's probably pretty much there, just because, who else are you going to follow on offense if you're not following, you're going to follow the quarterback, so there's not another starting quarterback on the team right now, so he's going to be it.
When we talk to Urban, I guess the next time will be in July at the Big Ten Media Days. I'll be interested to ask him if this is Dwayne's team. When did it become Dwayne's team? And did that predate Joe's leaving, or does that happen? How quickly does that happen? I think the Michigan game last year gives confidence in the players that, okay, we can follow him because we've already seen him lead us. So there's faith in that decision to follow him as the leader. And like he said in the spring, I am playing, practicing, approaching each day like I am the starter, and I'm going to do that until I am told differently. So everything he did in the offseason, he did it viewing himself as the starter and de facto leader of the offense, leader of the team. And not having Joe Burrow there, we've talked before, it clears out the waters, clears out any confusion, doesn't leave factions. Now, I can tell you there's plenty of players on the team that would have loved to have played for Joe Burrow, may have been hoping it was Joe Burrow, but Joe's gone. It's Dwayne's team now, and they're all fighting for the same goal. They want the same things, and I think they've seen that Dwayne has the ability to get them there. So, and as long as he's doing the stuff that he's supposed to be doing, that they've seen JT doing, if they see those same things, then they're gonna comfortably follow him. Now the question comes is, if he's not doing those same things that they're accustomed to seeing from their leader, does that create issues? And I don't think Meyer or Day would allow that to happen.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think they have been very clear about the expectations for the position and talking about, everything is being measured, everything is being judged, not just what you're doing on the field, but you work in the film room and you work in meeting rooms and all that kind of stuff, and what you're doing off the field and what you're doing in classes, all of that. So I think the expectation there is very clear. The example has been set very clearly for him by JT Barrett. So I don't think I have a big concern on that end. And the other thing that I think will help establish Haskins as a team leader is JT Barrett is gone. Billy Price is gone. Like, those are the guys who were like the big vocal team leaders, the guys who were, very obviously of the 9 captains on the team last year, those were, 2 of the guys who were like the captain, captain all caps captains of the team last year. So those guys are both gone. So you don't have like another big, powerful, figure on offense who's just, a huge, the person that people are naturally going to turn to. I mean, you've got Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin back, and those guys will almost certainly be captains this year, but those are not necessarily guys who are going to be those are not guys who were standing up in front of the locker room giving the big impassioned speech before the game last year. That was Billy Price. That was JT Barrett. So, there is a position open for Dwayne Haskins to take that role, or, at least assume some of that role. So I think that he'll be able to do some of it. He's not exactly the same person off the field and in a personality as JT Barrett was, and that's okay. But I think he is, the position is there for him to take, and I think he can, I think he's in a position to take that leadership role, and when he does, I think he's the kind of guy that people are going to follow.
Now, what happens if the Oregon State game, like half the team comes out of the tunnel wearing Joe headbands?
You know, as soon as you said Oregon State game, I thought, is he going to make an Earl Bruce headband joke here? And apparently we've been doing this podcast together too long. That like immediately I knew where you were going, which is the most random place you could have gone. Yeah, I don't know. I would personally prefer to see them come out in like what were the Chicago Bears Super Bowl Shuffle headbands? Or those like Adidas headbands? Like I'd prefer to see like just that kind of headbands back. I think that would be a good look for everyone. It might be a violation of the Nike contract, but you know that's totally worth it.
Actually, there was one more question, and comes from at R Morris 5. In your opinion, what impact does Real Life Wednesdays have on recruits? I see this as revolutionary in college athletics. And Tom, when we talked to the players, the signees in January, and talked to them the year before that, and they, to a man, talk about how this was one of the deciding factors, because it's not just about football, it's life after football. The parents love it, and you're starting to see other schools try to mirror it or to institute their own programs. But I remember talking to the 2017 kids, and you're talking guys who are coming from far away, Jeff Okuda and Baron Browning and Isaiah Pryor, and all of these guys talking about Real Life Wednesdays and what they want to be able to do after football and the direction that this program gives them, and the fact that the coaches aren't just focused on football. They're wanting more out of their players, demanding more, but giving them opportunities for more. And now you're seeing with Sammy Silverman as part of the football program, the Brand U, where they're helping players and all athletes really build their personal brands and make something out of themselves that way as well. So the well-rounded approach that Urban Meyer has taken at Ohio State, I think it is revolutionary, and it's also a way to combat the idea that players aren't getting paid or they're not getting enough out of this or they're not getting their fair share. I think Ohio State is giving them more than most, and this is one of the examples why.
Right, and it sets you up with, guys had internships at Nike, and Sam Hubbard had an internship on Wall Street last year. So, you got to remember, you're not just recruiting the 18-year-old kid, you're recruiting his parents too. And, parents aren't necessarily worried about all the same stuff that an 18-year-old is. If you are 18, you probably remember all the stuff that you were concerned about at that point. And if you're a parent, you're concerned about, okay, so after 4 years of football, knowing that only a small percentage of these people will go on to play in the NFL, what are you going to do then? It's the old, this is a 40-year decision, not just a 4-year decision kind of thing. And Ohio State has definitely done a nice job selling that and establishing something where you can show, tangible proof. Like, we're bringing these people in. You can start establishing connections. When we bring in the guy from Nike, whether it's Phil Knight or someone else, if you're Terry McLaurin, you can go talk to him, and then you can go get an internship there, and then that potentially sets you up for something after graduation. If whether you're going pro in the NFL or whether you're going to go try and do, I don't remember what his major is, marketing or something, but you potentially are setting yourself up with connections that not everyone on campus is going to have. So, not everyone on campus is going to have the opportunity to go intern at Goldman Sachs in New York like Sam Hubbard did. Now, Sam Hubbard's going to play in the NFL for a few years, but after that, he's set up pretty well to, potentially have if he has a 5-year or 8-year or whatever NFL career, after that, he's set up pretty well to potentially have a pretty lucrative career after that as well, if he wants to. So, that's when you're a parent, that stuff is important, that you're not just coming in and you're getting a general studies degree and then, a pat on the back and good luck to you. You're potentially setting yourself up with a good career where if your plan A of the NFL doesn't work out, because believe me, they do sell the NFL too. If you've been to an Ohio State game, They are showing you every Ohio State NFL draft pick on the scoreboard before the game when the recruits are coming out. That is not a coincidence. So they're selling the NFL, but they're also selling, hey, after the NFL, or if the NFL doesn't work out for you, there's also a plan B. We're watching out for you. We're making sure, no matter what, we're preparing you for your career, no matter what your postgraduate career is.
You said general studies and a pat on the back, and it sure sounded like you were channeling Jim Harbaugh talking about Michigan there.
That is, yeah. If you want to go back and Google Jim Harbaugh's quote about how Michigan funnels its football players into certain degree programs from when he was at Stanford. It was, I don't know, 2008 probably. He had some very pointed things to say that. I mean, if Ohio State wanted to, we talked about Michigan recruiting mailers earlier. That would make a heck of a. If we're taking stuff that if Michigan thinks it's okay to take what Ed Warner did at Ohio State and claim credit for it, I think it would be fair to have Jim Harbaugh, Michigan head coach, talking about how Michigan funnels football players into certain degree programs and that have no value.
What are the chances you think that quote is in the Ohio State football facilities on a poster board on an easel?
A couple of years ago they had the poster of the majors of the different of the players on the different teams, and Ohio State had a guy or two who was an engineer and some other a lot of business people, and Michigan had a whole lot of general studies, and that was something that got a whole lot of pushback from Michigan people, Michigan blogs. But that is not something that is somewhere that we have ever seen it. A lot of the whack is kind of off limits to us. We're in the team meeting room and that kind of stuff, and that's not in there. But there are plenty of other offices with posters that we don't see. It would not completely shock me if that was up on a wall somewhere, somewhere in that building that we haven't seen.
But you've got to be careful because parents are taking pictures and tweeting them out. So maybe there's like a room with all kinds of smack material where they're like, you have to turn in your cell phones before you enter this room, and then you go in there and it's just crapping on every single Big Ten program out there. Urban Meyer says they don't negatively recruit, but you can truthfully recruit using Jim Harbaugh's own words. Then maybe why not do it?
Yeah, that's like that. There is that room in there, but it's like that town in West Virginia where you're not allowed to have electronics in it.
Right.
You have to turn in your phone before you come in here. You cannot speak of this to anyone. But
are we the only two people that know that that's a thing?
I don't know. That's a fascinating. I really wanted to do a at one point one of my day jobs at various points has been doing documentaries and TV and that kind of stuff, and I found that place so fascinating, and I really wanted to do a documentary on it, but. Of course, the issue is you can't bring a camera in there, so that makes it kind of hard. So, unless you're going to do it with the old, like the old disposable cameras and take, that have no electronics or whatever in them. I don't know how you would do that. So that
you got to take like 40,000 pictures and then stitch them together.
Shoot it with a big telephoto lens from a mountain way across the
It's just it's an hour and a half of GIFs.
Yeah. Oh, wait, are you a GIFs person?
No, I said that knowing that somebody was going to get upset. But, it was GIF. I've always said GIF until, the inventor of GIFs said GIFs. But now he recently, I believe, came out and said, say whatever you want.
There you go. And say whatever you want. You can say GIFs or you can be wrong. Whatever you want to do, however you want to do it.
I am a GIF guy, but I went GIF there because I don't say the word a lot. And I'm trying to get back to my saying it the way I want instead of the way I was told, and it takes a while to get out from under that oppressive thumb of proper speakery. So, but I'll get there. Anything else? I think we're all done. I think we've said enough.
I think we have talked enough about football for at least a week.
All right. Thank you everybody for listening. Make sure to check out the rest of the shows on the Ozone Radio Network. Check out what Tom and I are doing at theozone.net. Tom, where can we see you on Twitter?
I am at Tom Orr 4, TOMORR, the number 4.
All right. And we will talk to you guys next week. Thanks for listening.
blasted through